We could be on the verge of something great. But we really need Washington, D.C. clowns and jokers to get out of the way. And we need to elect better people to know that they're limited in their knowledge and let the American economy take over. I don't want to get too economically wonky, but there's a really cool piece in Axios, which occasionally does acts of journalism, unlike other center-left outfits. But Axios has a piece up in the show notes you really need to check out for some good news and maybe a holiday smile. It's in the show notes today. Bongino.com/newsletter is how you access our show notes. The newsletter is the show notes when you sign up. It's free, of course. Brian Walsh, he has an article in Axios, The Coming Tech-Driven Productivity Leap. Folks, we're spending a lot of money. We're running into a lot of debt. One of the best ways to grow our economy so that the debt doesn't hurt us as much is productivity. Productivity, short for producing more stuff. It's very simple. Think about it, right? Forget all the economic wonkery, because there's one thing I noticed about economists, reading all their work and their research forever, is they love to over-explain things. Here's a very simple analogy to you in your real life why productivity and debt matter. We're in a lot of debt. Imagine you were in a lot of debt. Imagine you owed $50,000. That's a lot of money, right? By any standard, $50,000 is a lot of debt. Forget about a home mortgage. Just say you owe it to a bank for a loan you took years ago. You can't seem to get out of it. One of the best ways to get out of debt, if you don't have the income to pay it off, is to produce more stuff. In other words, you own a business that produces bagels. You want to sell more bagels. So you produce more bagels and people buy them and you make more money. And all of a sudden you're making $500,000 a year selling bagels. The $50,000 debt ain't so bad anymore, right? Pretty simple stuff. The United States economy works no differently at the macro level. The way to make our $27 trillion debt seem less significant is to increase productivity and produce more stuff. Stuff is where wealth comes from. More cars, more medicines, more computers, phones. I've talked about this frequently. This Axios piece is great. Productivity, or us producing more stuff and making big, bold, huge, enormous gains in the economy, ladies and gentlemen, for years has been stagnant. Yes, we've had some marginal increases, but we've had nothing like the bold leaps in the early 1900s and in the 20s and in the 50s. The bold leaps were electrification of the economy. Do you realize the oil? You know, the History Channel had a great show on this weekend, which it's been on forever, but The Men Who Built America, talking about Rockefeller and Carnegie and Vanderbilt and J.P. Morgan and Edison and Nikola Tesla. How these big, huge revolution, even intend to throw that in there, but you know, I always like to put my watching history on there. How the use of oil and energy and gasoline and how electricity changed everything. All of a sudden, you didn't have to go home from work at 5 o'clock anymore. You could produce more stuff until 10 o'clock at night because an electric light went on. Do you understand how powerful that was? Where are these big, bold innovations? You may say, well, the advent of the internet, fair enough, but it hasn't transformed the economy from a subsistence agricultural society, which we were at the turn of the century, to this industrial powerhouse we have now. Not much has changed over the last couple of decades. Where has the productivity been? Well, if you check out this screenshot from the Axios piece, they say that, listen, the downside of this coronavirus is the coronavirus. A lot of people died. There's very few upsides to that. There's no upside to death. But the one economic upside may be our economy may be transforming, and that big productivity moment may be on us right now. From the piece, they cite a tweet from this guy, Nabil, who on Twitter writes, hey, look at this. A working mRNA vaccine, first ever in humans, the Apple M1 chip, SpaceX's rocket launch, GP3, I'll get to that in a minute. That's pretty cool stuff I talked about before. Tons of cool companies IPOing and tons more getting started. A V-shaped recovery, electric cars, crypto going mainstream. This is from the Axios piece. It says also in a blog post, Tyler Cowen, who I like, added in a few others, including affordable solar power and remote work, and asked whether total factor productivity, a rough approximation of the effects technology and progress had on economic productivity in 2021, quote, will be remarkably high, maybe the highest ever. In other words, folks, what this Axios piece is saying is, are we on a verge of a productivity revolution like the 1920s? Electrification of the economy, the advent of commercial flight decades later, the internet's transmission of ideas around the world in microseconds. Are we on the verge of that right now? And he cites these technologies that are burgeoning, some of them brought on quickly because of the coronavirus, some not. Some have been at work for a long time. Now, the country's borrowing a lot of money from itself. We're printing up a lot of money to give to ourselves. Printing up money, making today's dollars worth less, making our kids work harder for less money. But if we were borrowing money from the future to finance a business, the U.S. economy now, that's going to produce more, can we get out of this? The answer is maybe. There's a piece I included in the show notes about this GP3. And I'm not suggesting the government has any role in growing the economy. It's better left in the private economy. I'm simply suggesting to you if the private economy can move forward with these massive technologies we're seeing now, and like Cowan and others at the Axios piece seem to think, we could have an explosion in productivity, make our $27 trillion in debt seem like nothing. GP3 is fascinating. It's without over-explaining it, and to be clear, I don't want to under or over-explain it. So I put a piece in Fortune on the show notes today, bongino.com/newsletter for you to check out yourself. Maybe it was Forbes or Fortune, but it's there for you today. It says, what is GPT-3? I'm sorry, GPT-3. It's an AI type system that doesn't give structured rules to artificial intelligence and allows it to learn by just inputting a series of examples. Kind of like a neural network. And it gives the ability, this artificial intelligence, to ask it a question and to get an answer in text, in basically human language. You say you give the GPT-3 an example of an app you want to develop, millions of examples over and over. It tries, it fails, it tries. Eventually it figures it out. You ask it to develop an app and you watch it write the code right in front of you. Imagine software developing new software in the future to clear the bugs from the old software, the software developed. We could be on the verge of something great, but we really need Washington, D.C. clowns and jokers to get out of the way. And we need to elect better people to know that they're limited in their knowledge and let the American economy take over.
You just heard Dan Bongino.